Good evening, and thank you for joining us on this Thursday evening. My apologies for starting late. We've been having some challenges in getting a speaker online, and we hope to have him shortly. And again, welcome to this three-part series. In these 3 days, beginning with today, Thursday, May 18th, we expect to have Professor Ranjay Gulati from now till about 7:30 p.m. IST. And he'll be talking about the vital importance of purpose, corporate purpose, that is. Tomorrow, which is a Friday, May 19th, from 9:30 a.m. till 10:30 a.m. IST, we will have Mr. Chandrasekaran, Mr. Natarajan Chandrasekaran, the chair of the board of Tata Sons. He'll be online with us. And we'll also have Mr. Harish Manwani, who's the chairperson of the board of ISP and a senior operating partner at Blackstone Ventures. Day after tomorrow, which is a Saturday, May 19th, from 11:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. IST, we'll have the global CEO of Unilever, Mr. Alan Jope, and he'll be talking about how to create a world-class company that is driven by purpose. So that's our plan. And this series is the brainchild of Professor Deepa Mani, who is the Deputy Dean of Executive Education and Digital Learning here at ISB. And hello, Ranjay. And after the next step, I'm going to introduce Professor Madan Pilutla, the Dean of ISP, and he's been our Dean for the last 2 years, and he's a professor of organizational behavior. And let me request Madan to introduce Ranjay to the audience. Thank you very much, and again, thank you for your patience. We look forward to a fun and exciting session today with Professor Ranjay Gulati. Over to you, Madan.
Thank you, Ram. Hi, Ranjay. And it's a real pleasure and an honor for me to introduce Ranjay Gulati, who is the Paul Lawrence MBA professor, MBA class of 1942 professor of business administration at the Harvard Business School. Ranjay is also a good friend of mine, so it's a real pleasure. I'm seeing him after a really long time. Ranjay is one of the world's leading experts on on strategy and organizational issues. But if I may, let me just take some time to tell you how special Ranjay is, right? So Ranjay is one of those incredibly rare academics those of us who are academics in this field, we refer to Ranjay, people like Ranjay as a triple threat. He's an outstanding scholar, right? And he ranks among the very, very top of his profession. In any kind of a ranking of citations, he comes out consistently among the top 10 authors in economics and business when they look at citations. An indication of his ranking among academics is that he's been elected as a fellow of the very prestigious Academy of Management. He's also a fellow of the Strategic Management Society. So that's one threat, right? So outstanding academic at the top of his profession. Second, he's an outstanding teacher. He's an award-winning teacher, and including, and in his earlier avatar, he used to be at Kellogg, where among the many awards that he received, he also got the Best Professor Award for teaching on the MBA and the Exec MBA programs there. And this is before he came to Harvard. And finally, and most relevant to today, his work has immense resonance with practitioners. Outlets like The Economist and other kind of outlets which thinking practitioners they read often rate him and his work as among the most relevant to leaders, to organizations, and to managers. Again, testimony to that is the popularity of his book. His most recent book, Deep Purpose, The Heart and Soul of High Performance Companies, is an absolute must read. And I'm sure at the end of his talk here, you'll go and you'll start getting a book. And this is an award-winning book. An earlier book of his, which is Reorganized for Resilience, Putting Customers at the Center of Your Organization, is also another award-winning book and well worth reading. So given the fact that he is outstanding on all these dimensions, those of us who are in the profession should feel a little jealous. We're not envious of him, because Ranjay also happens to be a really nice guy. Thank you, Ranjay. Welcome. and it's a real pleasure seeing you after such a long time.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Madan, who's a dear friend of mine. I've known Madan since we have grown together in this profession. And after introductions like that, I can only disappoint you. Madan has had high expectations, so my hope is to deliver as best as I can over here. And you have an amazing group of people coming after me as well. So let me dive right in, and if I may, I'm going to share my slides and dig into this with you. I hope that's visible to everybody.
Yes, yeah, we can see.
Yes, we can see them.
We can see them.
Yeah,
perfect. So look, I will tell you, the one thing Madan didn't say was, Ranjay, I never thought you would be writing a book on purpose. You know, I mean, Madan, who's been in this space and thinks about this for a long time, is like, Ranjay, what are you doing? Dabbling in spheres that are far removed. You know, we are academics, we are very concentrated, focused on one thing. So if you told me 5 years ago, Ranjay, I have a crystal ball and I can see you're writing a book about purpose, I would have said you're crazy. Not a chance. I mean, far from my mind, to me, purpose was mission statements. It didn't really matter. My research had kind of coalesced around the theme of unlocking growth in business in good times and bad, and catching market inflection points. And how do companies grow in down markets, up markets? I have a body of research in that. I have an article coming out in July in Harvard Business Review on leading through recessions. So it's been a kind of an ongoing theme, organic, inorganic growth for me. And I thought I had a winning formula in my head 5 years ago. Do the right thing, get the strategy right, and implement the strategy. I mean, that's what we teach. The bread and butter of business is get the right strategy, implement the strategy. You know, and this fits in with actually an original thinker, Kenneth Andrews, who was a professor at HBS in the 60s, who introduced the word strategy into the business lexicon. Because the idea he put forward was that business is about tactics, about a strategy, and about a vision, the what you want to do. And then above it sits the how you do it, the organization, the values, the culture, and all that, other operating rhythm, the processes. So much of my research was, what do you do? How do you do it? The what and the how question. Now, Andrews, being a good academic, also wanted to be comprehensive, and he put another word up there, why. But, you know, he didn't spend much time on it. Why do we exist? This sounds like a very philosophical, existential question. Why are we here on this world, in this planet? You know, every ancient religion has contemplated these questions. Philosophers, psychologists, you name it, have talked about and thought about this question. But I was intrigued. I said, okay, mission statements, company, who reads mission statements? They're wallpaper. I mean, nobody really reads these stuff. But I was intrigued at that time. I was going on a sabbatical, and sabbatical means you have time to think bigger thoughts. I had been chairing our advanced management program for 10 years, so I was immersed in that, and this was a kind of a hiatus. But I had learned a lot from my students in the AMP program. And they had pushed me to think hard about this purpose. They said, Ranjay, you're missing something. I always said, okay, CSR. You want some ESG, CSR professor? I'll bring somebody to talk about the ESG, CSR. That's what you mean. Purpose is profit plus. And I realized I was very confused myself, but I started to see some intriguing data. So the first one that intrigued me was this work in HBR in 2015 by Gartner and Mankins, and they were reporting people's research really, but they showed some interesting findings. They said, look, how do you unlock discretionary effort in employees in an organization? A classic question that microeconomists and organizational theorists have thought about for a long, long time. They said, well, there's job satisfaction. If you're satisfied at work, you will work hard, right? Then there was the movement in the 1980s and 90s started by a Harvard professor, Richard Hackman, on job design, saying, if you're engaged, and then Gallup ran with this idea, started measuring employee engagement, and suddenly if you were engaged, you worked even harder. And in the last 10 years, work that began actually at Michigan and Yale by Jane Dutton and Amy Ruzhnisky, who look at job crafting, said, when you're inspired, you work even harder. Now, the numbers that stunned me was these, that suddenly inspired workers are more than twice as productive as satisfied workers. that maybe there's something going on. And then people started saying there's a generational effect. So I said, maybe purpose, maybe this is a motivational tool, an HR tool that we haven't thought about. But then I started to look at this in the context of startups. So I was doing a study of scaling startups about 6-7 years ago. And as part of that, I interviewed 65 founder entrepreneurs of fast growth ventures that had grown really like crazy in the previous 5 years. And when I interviewed them, I talked about what is the challenges of scaling. And they all had this nostalgic story about the good old days. You know, in the good old days, we could do this. And in the good old days, we had that. And the good old days. And I said, what do you mean good old days? They said, oh, the culture, we were very family, you know, we all knew each other. And now it's very impersonal and we're big and, you know, we're bureaucratic. And when people can't describe something in organizations, they always regress to the word culture. Oh, it's the culture, you know. I said, no, I don't get it. So as I probed this issue, I wrote an article called The Soul of a Startup that came out of this research. I discovered one of 3 dimensions that they talked about was this loss of purpose. You know, and purpose wasn't some social project. It was about changing the world, impacting the market, redefining how customers did something, changing the landscape of competition in some way, you know, ambitious kind of undertaking of some sort. I said, we've lost that inspiration, if you will, in our business. And then actually I talked to Satya Nadella. And Satya was interesting because he told me, I said, Satya, tell me about your amazing story. And if you haven't read his book, I would strongly urge anyone to read his book. He said, look, Ranjay, we had to do the following. First, we had to build a strategy. And then we had to build an execution plan to implement the strategy. So I'm thinking, this is my guy. What to do, how to do it. And then he stopped me. He says, Ranjay, that's not it. We also needed a purpose. And I'm thinking, oh, really? He says, no, you don't understand. Without an animating purpose, we could not have done our strategy work or implemented our strategy. Now, I'm not convinced. Honestly, my first interaction with him, I said, like, Satya, I don't know. I don't get it. He said, you don't really know. It's our secret unlock. I was not convinced. Now, I realized that many CEOs were talking about this. If you look at the data now, 85% of Fortune 100 have discussed their purpose and values publicly on their website. So this thing it's in the air. So I thought maybe Satya is just kind of going with the flow of where's in the air. And there was some intriguing data, you know, consulting firms were producing data showing high purpose and low purpose companies, both on revenue growth, operating margin, TSR. So they had this kind of effort to kind of capture these ideas, right? And there was another one by BCG. So everyone is producing kind of findings that says purpose and performance might correlate. Financial performance over here, not social impact. But the media was all over this. They were cynical, like you wouldn't believe, right? This one says, this is the Financial Times article talking about the baffling search for purpose. Or there was an academic article called Sex, Lies, and Mission Statements. You know, there was another one called Big Business Has a New Scam, the Purpose Paradigm, right? Empty promises and self-serving slogans. So I'm trying to go on sabbatical, figure out what am I going to study in my 1 year off. I said, I always studied what makes organizations flourish. That was what I was gravitating towards in this next phase of my research. And I had this idea that strategy is an important piece of it. The organization that implements the strategy is another piece of it. And that's where I have been spending my time. And if I'm to believe Satya and these startup CEOs who are suggesting to me that this thing matters, this something called purpose might have something there. So this was the puzzle I began with. Now, as I got into it, I first had to understand what is purpose. Purpose is an individual level construct. Applying it to organizations is confusing. And the messiness of this confusion was really problematic to me. And I had to first understand, like, what is purpose? And I'm going to spend some time with you on that. Then why does it matter? Is it good? Is it charity? People said purpose. The word purpose has been hijacked. It's been politicized. People say purpose is only for shareholder value. Others say purpose is anything but shareholder value. So the extreme left and the extreme right, everyone has hijacked the term. So is it good for business? So that was an open question to me. So I'm in the midst of a large empirical project where we're measuring company purpose to see if it any way correlates with performance. Because the studies I showed you, they measure purpose in very noisy ways. So I was like, okay, I don't have the data yet, but I'm doing interviews. And in this study I should clarify to you, I interviewed, this is during COVID. So I had lots of time and everybody else seemed to have lots of time. And so I interviewed 18 companies and I did over 250 interviews. So this is a large project that ended up kind of extending out much longer than I thought. And then I'm going to briefly touch on the how. I don't mean this to be an overt cross-sell, but I do have 2 HBR articles where I talk about the how, and my book talks about it. But the HBR articles, which are online and free, anybody can look and read them. But I'll give you a teaser into the how as well. But I feel I need to spend time on the what and the why before I get to the how question. So what is purpose, right? The word has been around for thousands of years, mostly used at the individual level. I'll share with you, I realized Madan was going to be here. He's a trained psychologist. He can take me apart on this. So I'm going to use Invoker psychologist definition. So, this is William Damon, Stanford psychologist, who defines purpose as a stable and generalized intention to accomplish something that is at the same time meaningful to the self and consequential for the world beyond the self. To me, there are several pieces of the definition that are interesting. It's stable and generalized intention, right? And the other thing that is interesting is the word and, meaningful to the self and consequential for the world beyond the self. Most of us want to do something for ourselves. Let's be very real. But most of us also have this ideal of doing something bigger than ourselves. We hold on to this ideal that I can do something bigger than myself. I can have an impact in some way that is greater than my own footprint. So we all have, whether you want to call it a hero complex or whatever you do it, but why do we all watch James Bond movies and transport ourselves into James Bond, right? So, we all have this kind of ideal, but this is what another psychologist defines it as: a central self-organizing life aim that organizes and stimulates goals, manages behaviors, and provides a sense of meaning. What do they say? It's central, it's self-organizing, a framework, and it's a life aim. A purpose cannot be achieved. It's kind of an orienting framework. It's not a goal. So but how does it apply to organizations? In organizations, it turns into a mission statement. So I also, in my subsequent conversation with Satya, said, Satya, look, I went back and read your mission statement. And are you telling me this is your secret sauce? I mean, come on, give me a break. It's pretty generic. I can't even tell it's Microsoft statement. And he clarified to me patiently. He said, Ranjay, you're confused. Purpose is not a purpose statement. The words, yes, are important to us, but what you're missing here are the 9 months we spent debating to get to these words. And then how we put them to use on a daily basis in our organization, in our budgeting, in our resource allocation, in our promotion decisions, in how we think about our future strategy. It's an orienting scheme. And so I came to realize purpose is not a purpose statement. It's a unifying ideal, what I define as of the problems you want to profitably solve. I'm putting the word profitably in there, by the way. It's about the value you want to create. It's about how do you want to create it. And it's about whom you want to create it. And that's where stakeholder comes into the picture. People say purpose is stakeholder value. That's not true. And I'll tell you why it's not true. Purpose starts with ambition, aspiration for ultimate impact. It also has an idealistic cast about duties and responsibilities. It envisions the long term. Purpose forces us to think long term. And the moment we think long term, we have to think about stakeholders. In today's world, any business imagining long term value has to. And so here's how I realized this. This project I didn't clarify also began because I was working with BlackRock at the time. And Larry Fink, who's the CEO, had begun to write these letters to public company CEOs about purpose. So my question to Larry was, Larry, you're an investor. Why do you care about company purpose? He said, look, investor is in the risk business. We have to manage risk. We make money on risk. We price risk. And what is one way to de-risk businesses is to understand their long-term vision. Now, you can ask them, tell me your long-term plan and long-term vision. He said, but we find a much more effective way is to say, what's your purpose? And by the way, in today's world, anyone thinking long-term has to think about stakeholders. So stakeholder value is a byproduct of thinking long-term about your business. But somewhere in this messy terminology confusion, we've made purpose equals stakeholder. Purpose is a tax on business. And that's not far from the truth. Purpose is a general orienting framework about how you think about yourself. And by the way, in today's world, if you're thinking about yourself, you better think about environment, community, employees, customers, and other stakeholders besides shareholders also. But, I found a lot of what I wanted to call the book Purpose because my publisher said, hey, one word title sell a lot of books. But I couldn't. I found too many companies practicing what I thought was, in fact, I had to write a chapter on convenient purpose. For some companies, purpose was a disguise. It was just smoke and mirrors. For other companies, it was purpose on the periphery. It's CSR, ESG, stakeholder. Let's call it purpose. And let's say purpose is about more than shareholders, and let's have a little foundation on the side. The most dangerous one of purpose is win-win. We only do good things when they make money for us. Doing good and doing well simultaneous is the only time we will do good. So if it is not making money, so ignoring the orthogonals where you might do good and not do well, or you might do well and not do good, which is where most companies land. They have a portfolio of activities. But purpose then became win-win. That companies need to find that sweet spot. It's a not very big sweet spot in many cases. So that led me to realize. And by the way, people started saying the word purpose and profit. Now, when you say purpose and profit, you're implying that purpose is separate from profit. There's purpose and then there's profit. When you put the word and in there, you can say purpose with profit or performance with purpose, which is what Pepsi did. But when you say purpose and profit, and in fact, Larry also, one of his letters, made that mistake, I think, where he said purpose and profit, but he clarified that. He clarified that purpose is, and I'll go back to the late Peter Drucker, who said, profit for a company is like oxygen for a person. If you don't have enough of it, you're out of the game. But if you think of your life as about breathing, you're really missing something. And I think if you look at people like Larry Fink, who try to clarify that profit and purpose go together. This is not a share stakeholder value, tax on business. It's about saying when you have clear intentions, you have to think long-term, you think about the different stakeholders, and you can be a viable, successful business. Now comes, why does it matter? How can purpose be good for business? One of the gentlemen I interviewed is Thomas Thune Anderson, chairperson of Ørsted, large alternative energy company in Europe, the largest, I think. He said, I pity those who think of purpose coming at the expense of performance. He said, people are confused. And this one slide took me a year to figure out. I discovered there are 3 paths by which purpose can drive both financial and social performance in whatever way you look at it. The first is purpose is direction. It creates an orienting frame. Back to Satya. Satya said, look, in our technology businesses, strategies come and go. We have to change. AI is coming, ChatGPT has come, something else is going to come. We're going to have to keep evolving our strategy. Even our organization has to change. Our org structure is going to change. We're going to acquire businesses. We're going to sell businesses. We're going to shut down businesses. That's also got to change. He said, we need some constants in our business that don't change very often. Yes, we change them periodically, maybe a decade or two. What are those constants? And he said, purpose is one of those constants. You might call it a North Star. You might call it a swim lane. You might call it guardrails, but it creates some kind of sense of continuity in the business. And it also then creates alignment in the business where people understand like, hey, here's why we're here. So I'll pick on BlackRock. At BlackRock, their purpose is very clear. They're fiduciary to their clients. So they will not front run. They will not do a bunch of things. And what they will do and what they won't do is defined by their purpose. So you start to see directional clarity is one dimension by which purpose can help businesses. The second one is motivational. I already shared this with you. There's ample data emerging, especially millennials and Gen Zs, who seem to resonate with businesses where they feel inspired at work, right? People join companies and they quit companies. And now you might say, are they willing to take a haircut on wages? So they find they take small haircuts on wages also, but not much. You can't say, I'll pay you half or a third less because we're a purpose company. But it's the talent you attract and the relationship they create with their employees. It's less transactional, more relational. You know, what Denise Rousseau called psychological contract changes with the employer. So why are you here, right? And the last one is relational. Purpose is external. Purpose companies elicit trust. I hadn't thought about this. Both with their customers, purpose branding is huge, but also their suppliers and ecosystem partners who say they stand for something. So you see purpose businesses being able to elicit trust, whether in India it's the Tatas or the Mahindras or whoever you want to pick, or it's companies here, or it's Unilever. You're going to see Alan Jope after me. You know, how purpose entities are able to then elicit more effective partnerships. So I found purpose is not just, you know, and here's back to the motivational. This is what Satya said about motivational. He said, I want to work in a place where everybody gets meaning out of their work on an everyday basis. We spend far too much time at work for it not to have deeper meaning in life. So changing the connection people feel to where they choose to work. I mentioned to you, trust, the purpose branding. You look at the data, and in England, and Alan will tell you about, they have their brand, the whole portfolio brand. They have their purpose brands and the other brands. And in the last few years, Alan told me in one of my interviews with him at a podcast I did, that purpose brands are growing much faster than the non-purpose brands. So clearly customers seem to also care about it. So this is the what is purpose, why does it matter? Now let me get to the how piece of it. And Madan, will you keep me honest? I have about 10 more minutes. Is that about right?
Yes. That makes sense.
Is that good?
Yes, 10 minutes.
Thank you. So here's what some researchers show. Purpose decay. It's wonderful talk, senior leader talk. You know, we get together, have an offsite, we hold hands and we sing songs and say, purpose, I got my purpose now. But in fact, the typical reaction of frontline to purpose is one of perplexity. Like, how does this fit into my life? What am I supposed to do with this? So, you know, this purpose talk is wonderful at the C-suite, but how do you then cascade it down into an enterprise? I came to realize there were phases of a purpose journey. There's the discovery phase. By the way, some companies have one, or they wrote it down, or they want to refresh it. Like Johnson & Johnson's Credo has been refreshed many times over decades and decades. Others like Lego forgot. And as the CEO told me, he said, we had to go on a discovery journey. It wasn't inventing purpose. He said it was excavating it from who we are. Or if you look at the Mahindra story, at Mahindra too, you know, they had an outside consultant who interviewed people inside the company, and he said, listen, you don't know what you have. So it was more like, it wasn't something you invent and throw into it. Now, if you're a startup, then you might create one. Or if you never had one, then you might look for one. But there's an inductive inducing the purpose itself. Then there's the articulating and communicating it. This is not some change management exercise. How do you communicate purpose in a way that really sticks? Right? It's not a lecture you can give or a video you send out to people. The communication strategy is very interesting on how that works. Then there's the activation phase. How do you then bake it into your metrics and try to connect it to your culture, make it part of your operating rhythm, the structure and the processes, and how you create delegation, empowerment in the organization. And then finally, it's really kind of baking it into the DNA. And these were not easy stories. Let me start with the discovery. This is what Jon Vig Knudstrup, the former CEO of Lego, told me about. By the way, Lego was nearly bankrupt when he took over. So he had to transform the business. And he said, look, if you want to transform a business, you need to go back to its essence. And they were doing theme parks, they were doing, movies, they were doing all video games. And he had to go back to the founding days to look at what was our purpose when we began. Now, he said there's a danger. Looking into your past is a double-edged sword. And this led me to write actually an HBR article in December about this. It's what the Ghanaian folklore bird called the Sankofa bird. How do you look backward while looking forward? How do you engage in your past, but not let it bog you down, not just becoming nostalgic? How do you connect nostalgia with what is called postalgia? How do you look backward while looking forward? So in the Lego story, it was all about the founder had this idea of intelligent play. 2 words. And they said, let's now reimagine intelligent play for the future. What would intelligent play look like? So you take the essence and look forward, right? The next one is, how do you communicate? I have to tell you, this one, I looked at Pepsi and what Indra Nooyi did when she launched Performance with Purpose. It was really telling it like a big story. And there's a professor here at the Harvard Kennedy School who is a labor movement organizer, who studies social movements, liberation movements and revolutionary movements and also union movements. And he looks at how do leaders mobilize people around an idea? How do you tell that big story? And he talks about the 3 elements of a big story. It's what he calls self, my story, us, we as a collective, and why now? It's really a narrative with moral potency. And how do you, in fact, this is what the former CMO of Pepsi told me. He said it was complete surround sound performance, where people knew this by its abbreviation, PWP. Indra talked about her own story, growing up in a middle-class family in Chennai where there was no water. And her mother had to get up at 4 a.m. every day, 7 days a week, to fill those 4 buckets of water that she could get filled up in the 15 minutes they had water in the morning. So she said, let me tell you my story. So making it personal, making it real. In fact, as I looked at what leaders had to do to communicate, it reminded me of a very famous organizational scholar, Jim March, who talked about the idea that, leaders need to be both poets and farmers or plumbers. The metaphor kept changing, right? As a leader, poets bring magic. Farmers bring logic. You can't approach this as a farmer. You have to approach it as a poet. And I think leaders have to understand how to be both poets and farmers. So, now is purpose working. And this is the former vice president, now president. This is what he had to say about purpose and value. He said, don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value. Right now, how do you make this? So having a purpose and saying we have a purpose is one thing. It's like, let's look at what you do with it. How do you put your purpose to work? How do you bake it? And that's what I studied for the rest of this in my research was, what are the business levers available to you? How about the management levers available to you? Right? What about the human levers available to you? How do you bake purpose into all of these levers? Became the next piece of the puzzle. Now, I will tell you, all this is great academic, in some ways, administrative systems. The hardest part I found for companies after doing all these things was making it personal. How do you get people to really deeply, personally buy into it? Right? And how do you unlock value? Well, if you're trying to unlock value, right? In fact, I remember one of the people I interviewed is a sports coach here in the US. So he asked me, he said, Ranjay, what do you study? So I have now prepared my elevator pitch, because I can't explain I study networks and alliances and acquisitions and I study this and that and the other. It's too gone. So I said, look, I study how to unlock organizational potential. So I thought I have a very glib answer. That's my kind of pre-rehearsed, well-planned, unlock, or 3 words, unlock organizational potential. So then I asked him, I said, Coach, what do you do? He said, unlock human potential. I loved his answer much better than mine. I said, my God. And then he explained what he does, because they have a purpose for the team. But how do you make it personal? And his insight was, it's really hard to get someone to buy into some company or organizational purpose if they themselves are not thinking about their own life purpose. So he asked each player to think about their own purpose. And he says, I want you to then connect your own life purpose in some way to the organization's purpose. It doesn't have to be 100% overlap, because you can't subsume your personhood into the work. I'm not trying to make you a workaholic. But as you think about your life purpose, work is a piece of your life. How do you connect that in? And it made me realize that something I had learned from as a kid, from my own mother. When my mother had a business, and she was a fashion designer in Europe at that time in the early 70s. And I was giving her a lecture because she made me work like crazy with her business. And I was like giving her a lecture one time, and I was 17, saying, Mom, you need work-life balance. And she said, what a horrible phrase. So I said, what do you mean? She says, look, I can get work-leisure balance. I can get work-family balance. Work-life means work is not life. Work is in opposition to life. How can you think about that? And it's interesting. When people who find purpose at work, they are more engaged. We now know from research, this is something that, again, Madan knows very well, the classic, work on intrinsic motivation. People who find purpose at work are more engaged, productive, more resilient, more likely. But we also now know that people who find purpose in their lives have healthier lives, reduce stress, increase longevity, and buffers against chronic conditions. So forget about going to the gym or eating your vitamins, guys. Get a purpose. So let me summarize everything I've talked about. I've talked about, and the title over here is this article I wrote another year ago called How Startups Go from Big Ideas to Grand Ideals. And it was a continuation of my work on that startup CEOs that scaled fast. And I come to it, there are 3 things I learned. I learned what is purpose. It's not a purpose statement. It's not a mission statement. I learned that why does it matter, right? It unlocks value. It's good for business, right? And by the way, it also has not just financial results, but also social impact, because you think long-term, it forces you to confront the ability to serve other stakeholders besides your shareholders. And how do you do it? So since I'm talking to an audience in India, I couldn't resist. We in India have been contemplating these questions for a long, long time. So I'm going to share with you something from the, I hate doing it, sitting in Boston, lecturing you about the Upanishads over here from 10,000 miles away. But this is one of my favorite lines that I always will remember. You are what your deepest desire is. As your desire is, so is your intention. As your intention is, so is your will. As your will is, so is your deed. And as your deed is, so is your destiny. Somebody said that about 3,000 years ago. So this is not a new idea. So I want to thank you very much. You're welcome to, of course, read my book if you want, but I did something after this, and I would urge you to consider that. You can, of course, join me on LinkedIn or stay in touch in any way you want. But after I finished the book, I interviewed 10 CEOs because I realized this is not a niche idea. Now COVID was over. And I put them in a podcast that is on the HBS website, or you can go to deeppurpose.net and find it there. 2 CEOs from every continent around the world. 2 from the Middle East, 2 from Latin America, 2 from Asia, and 2 from Europe. Alan Jope was one of them. And I had them explain what was purpose, why was it good for business, and how were they going about it. And to me, I came away very inspired by some of startup CEOs. Some were investor CEOs. One of them was Ross Brewer, the CEO of Walgreens Boots Alliance. One was David Velez, the CEO of the largest digital bank in the world. One was Piyush Gupta, the CEO of DBS Bank. For anyone interested, you're welcome to grab those and listen to them as well. But Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over. I think I'm out of time, and I hope I've stayed within my time limit here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjay, for that fascinating talk. You're on the dot, actually. And we'll have half an hour for Q&A. And we have actually more than 1,000 people on this call, more than 1,000 managers on this call. And let me encourage all of you to ask a question by hitting that button, ask a question on your screen. And then there's a place where you can put in your question. And so let me give you a few minutes. And maybe in the meanwhile, while people are asking questions, Madan, any question from your end?
No, it's all yours. Okay. Thank you, Ranjay. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjay. Ranjay, I have a question while others are typing their questions. So one thing that comes up often is, some years ago it was vision. Before that, it was in the 90s, it was business process reengineering, and then and so on, different terms. What makes us believe that purpose will not just be another flavor of the decade or flavor of the year? What are your thoughts on that? What makes this more real than just another flavor?
That's a great question. And I'm really glad you asked that question, because it was also on my mind that, is this just another management fad we're capturing? The zeitgeist of the moment. This is now this thing, and now it'll be something else later. And let's step back for a second here. I think purpose is not some management tool. It's not like another TQM type tool that you impair. It's really asking yourself the question saying, why are we in business? Why are we here? It's a foundational statement about yourself that you orient your strategy, that you use to create an organization around, and you mobilize people around it. So actually, if you look back in time, purpose was quite prevalent in businesses in the early 1900s in the US. This idea was very commonly done. If you look at, we had authors like Philip Selznick in the 50s, and Chester Barnard was a professor at Harvard in the 1930s, who said that purpose is central. Peter Drucker said it was central. So I believe that what has happened is it has degraded into a mission statement. It became a checkbox, as opposed to really a tool that enabled companies to thrive. And I think in today's turbulent markets, high uncertain markets, people need anchors to guide their business. So I would like, but it's been politicized. The word has been hijacked by left wing, right wing. So if we can get through the noise, I think it should, I hope, be an enduring idea.
Makes sense. And let me encourage again to the audience to type in your questions. You just have to ask a question. And here are a few questions. One theme that comes up is purpose just for the large companies? Many of the examples we hear is about large companies, the Pepsi and the Tatas and so on. Is that really just for large companies? What's your thoughts on that?
So, I mentioned very briefly in my last slide over here that I said, from big ideas to grand ideals. The genesis of this project was my study of 65 fast growth CEOs. And one of the common themes among these fast growth CEOs was that they were not just about an idea. They were about something bigger than an idea. They were trying to transform something in their market. They wanted to be transformational. And I think venture capitalists have figured that out too. This notion that, it's a marker of ambition, right? My ambition is not, I have an idea. My ambition is, I want to transform the way retail gets done. So how do we think about that? I mean, one of the companies I looked at was Find, a tech startup in India, actually. They wanted to transform the way retailers engage with their customers, small retailers. It wasn't about, I have a technology that will do this, that, and the other, and all that. That was the way people talk about ideas. The ambition was, I want to transform the way retail gets done. And I think it's even more common. They may not talk about it in those languages, saying, what's our purpose? They might just say, look, why are we here? And I think that great ventures do that very well.
Let's start with that. Another common theme in the questions that come up is about individual purpose. And this is something I've noticed. How does one go about finding one's individual purpose? leave alone corporate purpose. Any thoughts on that?
So look, now I'm stepping out of my domain here. I should actually ask Madan to answer that question. Maybe, he's a psychologist. He's a wiser man than I am, but let me take a stab at it.
Sure.
Look, this has become a hugely important topic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not a new idea. Mark Twain once said the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you figured out why you were born. This is not a new idea, right? I think now this idea of personal life purpose activation is huge. And I'll tell you where I learned this is when I was chairing our AMP program. I would on the first day ask people, how many of you have thought about your life purpose? And the number used to be sometimes 10, 15%. Then it grew to about 30%. But I was always sitting at that number. And I would then bring in a coach for each of them.
Okay.
And some of them would say, I would tell them on a Friday, the first week of the program, it's an 8-week program in residence. And I would tell them on the first week saying, okay, on a Friday, I said, listen, my task for you is all of you are going to work on your life purpose. And somebody would raise their hand saying, is it due on Monday? And I'm like, no, this is not a weekend exercise. You're going to really introspect deeply about your own journey, right?
Yeah.
What got you here? And where do you see your legacy? It forces you to think very deeply. I think my big regret, I have very few regrets, but one of my big regrets is I waited too long to think about my own purpose.
Okay, very interesting.
So I think personal purpose, there's a lot of books on this topic. There's a great HBR article on personal purpose that came out a few years ago. It's a 7-page read, gives you a set of exercises to get you to think about your personal purpose.
That's interesting. In fact, one of the questions was that, would you, since you've been spending so much time in purpose, would you like to share your own purpose?
Now you guys okay, fine. You're going to put me on the spot here,
You're a friend of the family.
I'll tell you a personal story on this, first of all, very quickly, if I may. So this happened to me more than a decade ago. I always thought of my primary, my work purpose. I can tell you my life purpose. My work purpose primarily was research. I thought I was making the world a better place through my research and disseminating my research. And teaching was important, but I kind of did it on the side. I kind of did it, and I thought I didn't, I did it, and I was fine. I was a decent teacher. So I was in the middle of a research project, and I was really in the thick of some deadline. My assistant came to me and said, Ranjay, one of your former students wants to meet you. So I said, yeah, sure, set up a meeting, no problem. So my meetings are normally 20 to 30 minutes. So she says, okay. I said, give 30 minutes, go ahead. So then she comes back and says, no, he wants more time. And I'm thinking, I am so busy right now. And he's coming on this particular day, and your day is completely jammed up. So I said, okay, fine, whatever, 1 hour. She comes back and says, no, he wants to have lunch with you. No, I'm like, okay, now how long is that? She said, wants to have 90-minute lunch. I'm like, oh my God, I have no time. Anyway, I finally moved my schedule around. I said, fine, let's have lunch. So this gentleman, I remember him a little bit from a decade earlier, and he's come from New York, and he says, he's actually overseas. He's come to New York and he's come to Boston. So I said, how come you're in Boston? Nice to see you. How come in Boston? He said, no, I came here just to see you. I said, oh, very nice of you. Thank you. So then I said, after pleasantries for a few minutes, I thought he's come for some work. Maybe I can help him, Maybe he's changing careers or something I can help him with. So after a few pleasantries, I said, listen, how can I help you? And he said, oh, no, I don't need any help. So he realized my puzzlement. He said, I just came to see you and thank you. He said, I took your class, 10 years ago, and I promised myself one day I was going to come and have lunch with you and just to thank you. I was so embarrassed, ashamed, humbled, all of those emotions that all at once, because I couldn't even think. And it made me realize that, what I do, educating is part of my job, part of my purpose. And so I really believe in my work purpose, at least ties to at HBS. Our purpose is we educate leaders who make a difference in the world. So that's my work purpose. And I have to thank my former student for helping me come to that realization.
Wonderful, wonderful. So another thing, and there are hundreds of questions really here. As I scroll through it, one pattern that comes up is there are quite a few ask, is purpose a luxury? In the sense that, let's say a developing country, or even people who are at the bottom of the pyramid, shouldn't they first meet their needs and then think of purpose? It's almost in that Maslow needs hierarchy. Is purpose something that comes after you've achieved certain or fulfilled certain needs? What do you think on that?
Another excellent question. I'll tell you what I think is important is everybody should have a purpose. Every organization should have a purpose. I'll tell you why. Especially in resource scarce environments, when we are resource scarce is when we have to make trade-offs, choices. When we are resource magnificent, there are no trade-offs and choices to be made, right?
Yeah.
One of my colleagues has been doing a study in West Bengal of women business owners, small business owners, really in the bottom of the pyramid, and whether they send their daughters to school or not, and college or not, right? And how many do and how many don't. And not just daughters, actually, they do sons also, but they found the gender effect was non-existent, which was amazing, first of all, right? There's no discrimination anymore between boys and girls. But, so these are trade-offs. And purpose is a marvelous way to navigate our life through trade-offs and choices we have to make. So for me, I would submit humbly that it's a wonderful tool to have. In down markets, in recession, now we're going to have to do budget cuts. How do we think about it? People say, oh, forget about purpose. Because the confusion is purpose is CSR, charity, it's foundation, it's giving things away. I don't have money for myself. What am I going to do purpose? Purpose, charity, and other stakeholder management is a byproduct of long-term.
I understand.
So I think I wanted to be very clear about that.
I understand. Thank you for that. Another common theme in actually several questions is dynamic purpose. In terms of, can purpose keep changing for a company, for an individual? If so, is there any timeline we should think of? Or is this something that's subject to rapid change? Any thoughts on the change related to purpose?
You're asking me zinger questions. This is, I wish I'd interviewed you for
my
the
audience.
I wish I'd interviewed you for my book. I would have learned a lot faster. Well, I go back to what I said, Satya said earlier, that purpose is enduring. It's a constant in a changing world. But at the same time, it is also evolving. You see organizations periodically, like if you look at Best Buy, the largest electronics retailer in the US, they have evolved their purpose about in the last 30 years, 4 times. You look at Microsoft in the last 35, 40 years, they've also changed it 3 times. It's a refresh. It's not a rewrite. It's usually the Johnson & Johnson Credo. They have Credo challenges every decade or 2. So I think it's not something you revisit every week or every month or every year. It is a constant, but once in a while you have to ask yourself that maybe it fulfilled its purpose. Like if you think about Kodak and Fuji, 2 companies that both had 50% market share in the film business. They were always neck on neck, 49-51, 50-50. One is gone, one is still here.
Yeah.
Because they defined their purpose implicitly in very different ways. One said, we're a film company. One said, we're a chemical company.
Yeah.
And so we advance the world through chemical technologies. So, how do we imagine our existence can make a difference? Yes.
I understand. Okay. Another set of questions relate to measuring purpose. Even though it is this, in a sense, soft and is there any way to measure? If so, any recommendations on how to measure purpose, to measure progress?
Another really excellent question. So I'll tell you an anecdote over here. I finished my book. I gave it to the publishers. They had already typeset, a preliminary typeset of the book was done. And then I was on a panel discussion with Carmine Di Sibio, the CEO of EY, in which he was talking about measuring purpose. And his starting line was that we are accountants. When we have to do something, we always have to measure it. And then he started talking about how they had done purpose and put some measures in place around their purpose. I finished the panel. I sent an email to my publisher. I'm saying, I'm retracting my manuscript. I need to add a section. They were furious. They said, we've already typeset this thing. I said, no. This is a hugely important topic. And there's a section in the book about what EY did. Because you can't measure purpose itself. You can't say, how purposeful are we? So what they said, you can measure consequences of purpose. So they say, our purpose translates into 4 distinct dimensions of value. Client value, financial value, employee value, and social value. So we can't measure purpose, but we can measure the consequences of purpose. Or some would say the correlates of purpose. So they put metrics in place around that. And saying, if we are living our purpose, we're going to score highly. Now, I should clarify to you, some people left EY at that moment, saying, I can't deal with this. I like only financial measures. But they also attracted more talent.
Okay.
So these metrics are very noisy and loaded in some ways. So I think you can't measure purpose directly, but how can you look at correlates of purpose?
Okay. Very interesting. There's another very interesting question that was worded very well also. At what level of specificity do you give purpose? If it's too specific, it may not align with many employees. If it's too abstract, then it's too generalized. It's sort of, it's not something anyone can relate to. So what is that level? How do you go about identifying a level of exactness, I guess, to purpose?
Yeah. So there's actually, again, you guys are asking such amazing questions. There's actually an article, academic article by a Wharton professor named Drew Carton. And Drew Carton studied in the Administrative Science Quarterly, a journal that, again, Madan and I know, all of us know well in academia. And he talks about the paradox of these statements. And exactly what the trade-off you just outlined in the question, that, you want it to be sufficiently general to be inspiring.
Yeah.
But then you also need some specificity in there that engages or connects with you. So yes, that there is an inherent tension that has to be managed. And there's no question about that. And I think but I also want to clarify to you that we shouldn't fixate on the wording only. Yes, you want to get the wording right, but the wording becomes less important than what you do with the words.
Mm.
But you're right. You're walking a fine line, the razor's edge, between generality and specificity. If you get too specific, then it's not inspiring and it becomes very, very bogged down. So the wordsmithing is a bit of a challenge. And some people say, do you do it top down, bottom up? I've seen both ways. So in some companies, they'll do a crowdsourcing exercise saying, give us some words that capture our purpose. Then they'll aggregate that. And then the top down will kick in saying, let's organize and here's the final statement. Yeah. Some will do voting even, saying, we have 3 statements. Which one would you like to choose? Some will just top down it. So there isn't a right answer on the wordsmithing process itself.
Okay. Madan?
So Ranjay, this is for me, I just wanted to jump in and take the privilege of asking one question. This, and it relates to what you're just saying about specificity and also the previous, so when we're talking about measuring. So the question I have is there a danger that once we have purpose and a very clear purpose, we have a homogeneous group of people, right? So within a certain set of people get attracted to the organization over a period of time, we have like very, very similar people. And then I'm just tying it back to your earlier work on resilience and change and so on. So does it build in some rigidity into the system? So that's...
So, it's interesting you bring that up. No. Madan is a great, great question. And Madan and I have a dear common friend, Fanish Puranam. And Fanish and I did a paper actually on culture. And part of our finding was that strong cultures are good for business. If you have a strong culture, it's good for your business. But the tension we walked there was that cultures become hard to change. They are the last thing to change. They are sticky. and they feed on themselves. They create antibodies that resist change. So any change agent who wants to change the culture is basically fought back by the culture. And so the question you're asking is, does purpose create that? If you look at it dynamically over time, does it create that? I haven't thought about that. And I think, there's something truth to what you're saying, and which ties back to the earlier question that once in a while you need a purpose refresh.
Right.
And why did Satya do a purpose refresh? In Johnson & Johnson's case, they had a CEO who came in, Alex Gorsky, who also did a refresh. A lot of these transformation leaders, the Lego CEO came in and did a purpose refresh. And so I teach a class on business transformation right now, turnaround and transformation. And I'm finding a number of CEOs will use a purpose rewrite as part of the turnaround transformation strategy. And maybe there's something there. I hadn't thought about that. The reason they do that is purpose itself becomes a barrier, if you will, if it's locked and loaded into that's who we are, because your strategy gets woven into that. So I think it's an absolutely fair question that it creates rigidity without our realizing it.
In fact, there's a very interesting question. The way it's worded is, if the human possibility has a different purpose than the organization, meaning that person, then should you ask that person to leave the organization? Any thoughts on that? If individuals that are somewhat different, or perhaps radically different from the organization.
It's interesting. First of all, life purpose and organization purpose don't have to be 100% overlap, right? The idea is there should be some intersection.
Yeah.
And the idea is that for humans to thrive and for organizations to thrive, when that human comes to work, they should feel that that little intersection point is being fulfilled. That I'm able to live my life purpose through my work. In fact, the CHRO at Microsoft, Kathleen Hogan, likes to say, you don't really work for Microsoft until Microsoft works for you.
Yeah.
And I think there's some truth to that. Now, I would like to believe that the labor market is a very intelligent sorting system. There is a matching that happens. And now with turnover and ability to move around, mobility increasing, that you will see a self-selection. So you ask yourself, what kind of people do I want to see in my organization? And I think there is a labor market sorting that happens. One of the companies I studied was a Swiss company called Bühler. All of us consume their product, but no one knows it. Almost half the grains in the world are processed on their machines. They're big in India, by the way. Lentils, all the dals, they have like almost half rice, wheat, you name it, chocolate, pasta, are all made on their machines. So they launched this huge purpose initiative about a little more than a decade ago. And it was amazing. Their ranking in desirable places to work in Switzerland went from nowhere to all the way up there in the top 5. And they don't know why. And the kind of people they were attracting also changed. And it wasn't some purpose statement, right?
No.
It was what they did with those statements. And it changed the talent. And then ultimately it changes the culture of the place as well, which we haven't talked about as the other word that comes into play as well.
Culture, absolutely. And there's a question that was bound to come, and that is, in a world where AI is becoming dominant, where does purpose at all fit in? Is that going to be important, or is this going to change dramatically? Is that any thoughts on that?
That's another excellent question. Now, look, the AI is a wild, wild west out there, but I think is, what we're all talking about. Everyone is. When we talk about governance and safety and all these things, we're all talking about creating guardrails for the world of AI. Is that right? We all want to create guardrails. What I had in an article I wrote a while ago, I called it freedom within a framework. I think purpose provides a guardrail, right? It provides a larger framing around what we do with what I consider to be very powerful tools. One of the CEOs I interviewed, I mentioned from the podcast, was Piyush Gupta, the CEO of DBS. And, a bank sits on a ton of data. And DBS has been transformed into a digital bank. So they have massive capabilities. And one of the things that he said they are working very hard on is creating responsible governance systems on what they will and will not do with the data they have. Because the opportunity set is phenomenal. So how do you create those guardrails around responsible AI? And I would say, I don't think purpose solves it for you, but purpose is yet another guardrail to consider. So, very true.
Yeah. And I'm going to end with this question. This is sort of a very big question, or perhaps even a provocative question. Is purpose the last gasp, the last defense of capitalism run wild? Is purpose, and actually it was worded very well, the last gasp of capitalism?
So, there's a larger debate, and I'm really glad you brought this up. And it's a great way to end the conversation so I was inspired by a colleague of mine. There were many sources of inspiration I had, and one of them was Rebecca Henderson, who wrote a book called Reimagining Capitalism. And I think these are statements that were emerging at the time that, capitalism itself is in trouble. That, and I think so there are different people arguing for different things. You have Colin Mayer and others in Oxford. Some say we need more intervention. We need more state intervention to rein capitalism in. I'm not disagreeing with that. There's always room for a regulatory framework. You can't run a free market economy with no regulatory framework. We know that doesn't work, right? But how do we create internal self-policing guardrails also? That how can organizations show they are more responsible? The whole business roundtable effort to sign a statement saying the purpose of business has changed. I think business leaders I've talked to understand the society has given us a license to operate. And if we don't understand how to operate more responsibly with a long-term vision, which involves an array of stakeholders, we are going to be in trouble. And so I think but the mistake I don't want to make is I don't want to suggest that purpose is the silver bullet, the magical solution that is going to solve all the problems of capital. I don't want to go that far. I think it definitely is part of, and I think we have to see forcing mechanisms. So what BlackRock was trying to do and has tried to do is saying, forcing comes saying, tell me your purpose. What's your purpose?
Absolutely.
So when you have institutions pushing in this direction, I think that can allow businesses to think more responsibly. And I've seen, I've read some with my mother also on this topic that, how can we create more responsible businesses that understand their responsibility, not just to shareholders, but also to customers, to their employees, to their community, and to the planet. And I think this is an important part of this project, if I may say so.
Absolutely. Ranjay, thank you very much for that fascinating, I would say deep and meaningful presentation that you just gave. It triggered a lot of questions, really hundreds of questions, and we have really tremendous engagement. And let me just remind the audience again that tomorrow we'll continue with this, with another fascinating conversation with Mr. N. Chandrasekaran, the chairman of Tata Sons, and that will be from 9:30 in the morning till 10:30 in the morning, IST. That will be an online talk again. And we are again looking forward to that. We'll also have Mr. Harish Manwani, who's the senior operating partner at Blackstone and also the chairperson of the board at ISP. So we're really looking forward to that. And again, please continue this engagement with the questions and the very extensive involvement you've had. And Ranjay, again, thank you very much for that.
Ranjay, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm delighted you are having this conversation in the first place as well. So delighted. I haven't been to ISB in a long, long time. One day I hope to be back and see you all in person. But really enjoyed the interaction. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjay. And thank you, Madan. Thank you very much. Thank you all, and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you, and good evening.